Okay, moving on, I would like to invite our colleague Rob Smakman, Managing Director and CEO of Alvo Minas, to his presentation on the Palma polymetallic complex Tocantins. Rob is a geologist with over 20 years international experience, over 10 years which were in Brazil. Fluent in Portuguese, he's successfully founded and listed Crusade Resource and was responsible for instigate its Brazilian entry and operations. Rob, welcome, and please, you can start your presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Adelene. Let me just get the screen organised. And here we go. Hopefully you can see that now.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Excellent. Well, first of all, I want to thank Adimbi for the opportunity and also for their patience. As you may have heard, there's been a bit of technical difficulties bringing this talk to you today, but I'm really pleased to be able to present it. It's a new story. I think it's an old project that may be familiar to some of the Brazilian audience, but it's an exciting new chapter for this small company, and I hope to be part of this the mining industry and exploration industry in Brazil for many years to come. So the Palma Project may be known to a lot of you as Palmaropolis. It's a little bit easier for our Australian colleagues to say Palma rather than Palmaropolis, but it's a project that may be familiar to you all from the CPRM story, and that really began in the 1970s. It was discovered initially in the early 1970s by the CPRM when they were looking for nickel on a regional basis. And they didn't find a lot of nickel, but they certainly found some copper in the stream sediments. And into the later 70s, that stream sediments turned into soils and ground, geological mapping, and there were some targets defined during that period. In the late 70s and early 80s, the CPRM concluded the majority of their work, and that really focused in on 5 prospects, and they named them eventually C1, C2, C3, C4 and C5. And during that early 80s period, the CPRM conducted over 30,000 metres of diamond drilling into the project. They completed ground geophysics, obviously a lot of mapping and soils and streams, but also some preliminary metallurgical test work. So quite a lot of work was done in the 80s. The Japanese government, through the group called JICA, spent 3 years on site as well, doing a stage program of mapping some ground IP and geophysics, and they drilled 6 diamond holes as well, mainly at the C4 target. And then following that, the project largely sat idle until around 2008, when Votorantim and Lara Minerals formed a joint venture to explore the region, and they flew a heli VTEM survey across part of this area that we've managed to acquire. Now, that was a really important piece of regional work that was completed in 2008, because VTEM at the time, and now, is great at highlighting conductive ore bodies or conductive areas, and it can become a really important tool for exploration. And of course, this is a style of mineralisation, the VMS style, which tends to cluster. And what that means is you can often have multiple prospects or deposits within the same region, and not all of them will be sticking out of the ground like the C1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 were. So those initial discoveries were really found by geologists walking on the ground, seeing the gossan sticking out of the ground, sampling through soils, and then drilling from surface. Whereas the HeliTEM, the VTEM survey, gives you the opportunity to find similar prospects or deposits that may not be sticking out of the ground, that may be buried. So in that period, following that VTEM survey, they tested some of the conductors and didn't have any success. However, they never did a deal with the CPRM on the key ground that hosted the known targets. And so the project sat idle again for another 10 years or so, until 2016, 2019, when the CPRM decided to commercialise the assets. And I guess they've made a decision to take multiple projects through the auction process. And the first one was Palma. So we became interested early on and followed the process of that auction. And in October 2019, we won the auction, which was held in Rio de Janeiro. It was quite an important day for Alvo, and that started off a process of taking over the project, and that really came to fruition in February 2020 when we signed the contract with the CPRM. I shortly thereafter went to PDAC to start talking about some funding for the project, and of course, not long after that, in fact, it was the week after, or the week I returned home from PDAC to Australia, that COVID hit and really changed, I guess, the landscape for everybody globally. And so where we are now is Alvo is about to go public. We're in the middle of the final stages of the becoming listed on the stock market in Australia, and we've raised enough money to do the exploration and hopefully really advance the Alvo project, or the Palma project, I should say. Some of the highlights and some of the things that we've been able to achieve in the last year or so, we've been able to estimate the C1 and C3 deposits into JORC compliance. So we've spoken, I've heard a couple of the talks regarding Brazil's growth in terms of securing a system that allows them to classify resources. In Australia, we use JORC. In Canada, they use 43101. It's quite a high bar to get to those levels. So we're really pleased that we can get those two deposits into JORC equivalents. And so that's they combine to about 4.6 million tonnes at 1% copper, 3.9% zinc, 0.4 lead, and 20 grams per tonne of silver. There is definitely some gold associated with it. Unfortunately, there's not enough systematic sampling of the gold to actually estimate what that would be. However, we intend to do some of that work in the future, and hopefully we can bring gold into that equation as well. It is near surface, so these two outcrops these two prospects do outcrop. It's the first time that we can see that this entire package has been, I guess, put together. We have over 500 square kilometres now under tenure in the same company under Alvo. And I think the other point that we're excited about is that there's a second project that we've identified and we've applied for, and it's called Canabrava. And Canabrava is prospective for nickel, copper, and PGEs. It's hosted by the Canabrava layered mafic ultramafic layered intrusion that sits down to the southeast. And this has really been a target that we're a little bit excited about. I think that I'll show you a map in a moment, but Canabrava itself is based on there's been some recent success in Australia looking for these types of deposits, and we think we might have found something that could be quite good for us in the future. On a sort of a semi-regional basis, the VMS style deposits are hosted in the northern part of the Palma region. You can see where the C1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 prospects and targets are. C2 is not on our ground, and so it's not included in our calculations. C5 has only had a couple of holes into it, so I think they only have hit disseminated mineralisation in that one so far. But we'll follow that one up with ground geophysics, ground EM, and then some drilling. The majority of the deposits of the tonnage that are in the JORC compliance are the C1 and the C3 deposits. They're about 15 kilometres apart, so there's plenty of scope in between to look for other prospects. And then, of course, C4 sits further to the south, and C4 is slightly lower grade, a little bit deeper, and it needs more work as well to get it into JORC compliance. So that's a focus that we'll be having on the project. On the right-hand side, you can see the terms of the agreement. They're well known. They're converted into Australian dollars for the Australian market. But I think the important part of it is that there's a royalty that's paid, obviously, once we're into production. Hopefully, when we get into production, there's a drilling component that we will spend and we will work on over the next few years, and then there are staged payments that will come into place once we've been satisfied that the exploration has been well completed, the title's transferred, and the mining licence is granted. A really important part to us is that the information that's come along from the CPRM is in great condition and certainly has been really fundamental in our analysis of the region, and it'll be the starting point for our exploration, our launch pad, so to speak. And it includes over 14,000 stream sediments, soil samples, hand concentrates, rock chips. You can imagine that there's a wealth of information already available for us. 32,000 metres of drilling. There's the VTEM survey that was TIFF from 2008. There's obviously magnetics, there's radiometrics. We've collected the recent ASTA data and a whole bunch of of different layers of information that we've been able to combine. Where it's located, this is a slide I can spend less time on because it's so familiar to the Brazilian audience, but the project sits about 5 hours north of Brasilia, just north of the border with Goiás. There's great infrastructure around it. That's the north-south railway that links the country. There are ports. There's hydroelectric schemes around us. We have the town of Palma is close by, so there's power and water and roads and rail. So all the fundamentals for the future allows us to hopefully develop the project quite easily. This is the resource calculation, and we've taken a slightly different approach to putting the resource together. So previously, the CPRM estimated the resource using a zinc plus lead lower cut of 1%. We believe that an approach where using a net smelter return as our cut-off grade is a more appropriate approach because it includes contributions from all the different elements in there. And what we did when we modelled this deposit, we took each element separately and we modelled them separately to see if they were zoned within the deposits, and typically VMS deposits are. We found there was significant overlap with all the different elements, as you would expect, and then there are areas that are slightly zoned as well. We noticed in some of the results that we do have for gold, there was quite a strong correlation with pyrite. So we've actually modelled the pyrite separately as well, and that will be something that we'll be resampling in the existing drilling, which you can see on the right-hand side. That's the core storage facility that is actually in Caeté, where the majority of that 32,000 metres is stored. So we expect to go through that, resample some of that core for the gold to try and get an understanding of how much gold is actually associated with these resources. You can see on the two resources, C1 and C3. C3 is slightly larger and slightly better grade in both copper and zinc. It's probably the first focus for us. Let's look at C3 first of all. On the left-hand side is a drill plan with some of the better results. I won't go through those individually, but you can note that these drill sections are approximately 100 metres apart, and this is pretty much the main reason why the resource is classified as inferred. So that spacing on a deposit of this size is too broad to allow the category to be any higher than inferred. So there's a bit of work for us to do there to infill the drilling here. So we need to take that to at least 50 metres line spacing between the drill lines. And then obviously we'll do some twinning and we'll do some deeper holes and some along strike and down dip, obviously, to try and see if we can not only upgrade this resource into indicated, but also look at turning it into increasing the size of the inferred as well. We've had some of the golden zones that have been sampled are at the bottom here, and you can see there are some interesting numbers. I don't expect that we will have a lot of gold in that component, but even if it's 0.4, 0.5 grams per tonne, then it will be a significant contributor to the overall product mix. I'm going to show you a couple of cross sections through the deposit. On the left-hand side, and they're both fairly similar. It's broadly sits on a contact between a mafic and a morphelsic metavolcanic unit. It's fairly steeply, the geometry is quite steep. It does go very close to surface. We think there's a potential to be open pittable here, but then certainly underground once we get below a certain depth. And it's still open at depth, and it's still open along strike and down plunge. So there's plenty of opportunity for to grow this into the future as well. In terms of C1, which is the second of the two main deposits, this is even had a lot more work done on it. The extent of this is approximately 1.2 kilometres in strike length, so quite significant footprint. Again, the drill lines are 100 metres apart, so they are inferred, and so the category of the resource calculation is inferred just because of the interpretation that goes on between those two lines. So to get a lot more confidence, we need to infill that drilling to allow us to increase our confidence on the category, hopefully into the into the indicated category. Again, some of the results, there's some gold numbers in here, not as many as at C3, but there's also, that's something that we'll be following up. When I look at the geometry of this particular deposit, I split it into the northern zone and the southern zone. The north is has quite a regular geometry, whereas the southern half is a bit more it's a bit more complex. So if you look through some couple of cross sections here, the northern zone, which is on the left here, is quite steep. It goes very close to surface and has something similar. It looks quite similar to the C3, whereas on the right hand side you can see that the not only is the contact folded, but the mineralisation follows that contact. And one of the opportunities here is that the contact on the fold hinges, you get some thickening of the actual mineralisation zone. So with that thickening comes a plunge component. We believe that plunge component could be quite an interesting target for us as well, not only down dip but down plunge. So that's something that we'll be following up. I spoke a little bit briefly before about the potential for new targets and new exploration. On the left-hand side is the VTEM, is one of the images from the VTEM survey. We had a consultant go through and find the best conductors that he could find. He stopped at 20 because that's more than enough for us to start with. So we've ranked all those targets. We've overlaid images like the Aster image on the right-hand side, along with the soils, the geology, and all those other layers that are available to us to create a matrix of exploration targets that we'll systematically explore for. And it's my sincere hope that we will find a more than one new deposits here at Palma, and create a project that has enough, I guess, momentum to turn into a development project in the near term. I want to show a quick example of a couple of targets. This is what we call C1 extension or JS43. This is the C1 deposit, and you probably recognise the drill holes from an earlier slide. There is an anomaly from the VTEM that's associated with the mineralisation in the south, and I think that's a factor of that thickening in the hinges that we see. We get that bulk massive sulfide occurring and creating that conductor that's visible to the VTEM. But to the north, about 600 metres away, is another conductor that's sitting along strike without any drilling into it, and I feel like that's a really tantalising prospect for us to go and drill and have a look at. So it has had a couple of holes in the southern tip of it. They did hit some disseminated mineralisation, but haven't been tested. So what I intend to do here is get some ground geophysics on the ground on the surface, some VTEM, some like fixed loop EM or even moving loop, create a more detailed drill target, and if it hangs together, we'll put some holes into it, and hopefully we can find another C1. This is a slightly different one. This is again another conductor. C3, which you can see the drilling pattern. There's a small gossan outcrop that sits there, and at the northern tip of it, there's a small conductor that appears to be associated with mineralisation. But to the west, there's a very large conductor, as you can see over here, right next to the sediments. And this particular conductor may or may not be a massive ore body. It could potentially be lithological. So we'll take the same approach. We'll do some ground geophysics across it. We'll do some soils and some mapping and see if we've got any outcrops in the area. And if it does hang together, then we'll drill it and we'll test it. And that's just a couple of examples of some exploration targets that we think are really quite interesting for us. I'm going to skip forward because I'm running out of time.
5 minutes, please.
Yep, thanks. I'll keep it quick. This is the target down to the southeast, and it's called the Carnabrava target, named after the layered intrusion that's here. And we've managed to acquire a bunch of ground along the southern or the eastern edge of this layered intrusion. In a layered intrusion, you have mafic and more mafic rocks, and in this case here we have a small layer of ultramafic rocks which are purple, and it's sandwiched in between these two green layers. And the only regional work that we've got so far from this particular prospect is some stream sediment samples that were done by the CPRM, and we've remapped or relogged those samples, and we've noticed that we have some anomalous results for both nickel, copper, gold and PGEs along that contact zone. So we're really interested in this area. It's not granted yet, but once it is granted, then we'll get our boots on the ground. We'll do some mapping and some sampling and perhaps some additional test work from a geophysical perspective. And if we find a prospect, then again, we'll take it through to see if we can turn it into something real. Bearing in mind, this is the same layered intrusion that outcrops 50 kilometres to the south at Nicolandia, where Anglo-American have been mining nickel laterite for a very long time. So we know that the system has some nickel in it. And that's the talk. So look, thank you again very much to Adimbi for the chance to present a really new company and a new effort into Brazil. And I'm just hoping that we'll be part of the next CIMEX Min as well with some with a big update.
Thank you, Rob, for this interesting presentation. It's a very robust and innovative project, and you post some very interesting results. I have some questions for you.
Great.
The first one is about the ore mineralogy. Are they similar in the known bodies? Also, you told us about the sulfide zones and highlight that has been recognized pyrite adjacent to the massive sulfide zone. What you can find in the main ore bores?
Okay, so the mineralogy is really interesting. The main sulfide species are chalcopyrite, galena, sphalerite. We have some pyrite. We have pyrrhotite. So there's quite a number of sulfide species, and there's also there's massive, there's brecciated. We have some banded, and then of course we have disseminated sulfides in the ore body in the ore bodies as well. In terms of how they are different and how they are similar, we're really learning on that at the moment. So I think on that on the C1 deposit in the southern zone where it's folded, that thickening I think has resulted in some remobilisation, or it's been caused by remobilisation. So we're getting some different textures down there, and I also think that understanding how the disseminated I guess zones into the massive zones is actually a really important part of our exploration model going forward, and a part of that we don't really understand very well yet. So we'll be focusing on that quite carefully.
Wow, it's very interesting. Are you using petrophysical to validate the geophysical data models and inversions?
Not yet. The CPRM did quite a bit of that work in-house, and we've got that information. And basically, my geophysical team, or my consultants that I'm using, are going through that information now, because that petrophysical work is actually being quite important to see if IP will work, to see if EM is a valid exploration tool, because with EM can be quite effective looking for nickel sulfides specifically, because they all conduct quite, they're all very strong conductors. But the massive sulfides, or the sulfide species that I listed before, some of them are very poor conductors for electromagnetic kind of surveys. So we need to try and balance how those EM surveys will work, because they won't be as clear as when you're looking for nickel, basically.
No, it's really interesting, this partnership. And you showed us in C3 West, you said that conductor is west of the C3 deposits and does have a conductor coincident to the mineralization. You also maybe is a lithological response, but mineralization close is disseminate sufficient. Was not clear for me.
Yeah, so there is a small conductor that's associated with the mineralisation to the right on the actual drilling on the Gossan. But the one that's over to the west is a conductor that we don't know what's causing that conductor yet. So it hasn't been drilled. We don't know if it is a sulfide or if it's a lithological issue. And I think that's going to be the challenge, is making sure that that the conductors that we have that are our exploration targets, we need to do as much information on them as possible to only drill the best ones. Yeah, because if we drill 10 targets and they're all lithological, then we're not doing our ground geophysics or our job well. Because the drilling is the expensive part, right? So, yeah.
Oh, thanks. The study you are conducting using the available data will allow Alvo to define a successful strategy of mineral exploration in search of new VMS deposits in the Tocantins province.
Sorry, I kind of missed that question. Can you repeat? Sorry.
Yeah, you showed some results. Maybe we can call the footprints for VMS in the Tocantins province. Do you think you will open new opportunities for this kind of prospection and the Tocantins?
So I definitely think that we have most of the district, a district scale project, and my aim is to try and build our resources, be they at C1 or C3, into a 10 million tonne inventory. At 10 million tonnes, which is double what we have already of indicated category, that really gives us enough momentum to build a new project in the region. And the history of VMS around the world, and you look at, you find VMS projects in every continent. they tend to be very long-lived projects. They tend to have, they obviously cluster, we all know that, and you can have a quite a significant amount of zinc and copper coming from these kind of projects. So, you know, if we can get to that hurdle, that 10 million tonne size, I really feel like we will open up a new district. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your
It's a pleasure.
And provide
I think
this opportunity to know more about the project we're developing in Palma region.
Thank you, Adelene. I think Roberto may have a couple of questions in the chat.
If I may I?
Sure, you may.
Yeah, Rob, thanks a lot for your presentation. Excellent. And yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is for Palmeirópolis, and despite of the amount of data that you have available in terms of geology, geochemistry, perhaps geophysics as well, but from the government, from the CPRM, that you are using to assess your target, your prospects. Well, your project is still, let's say, in an early stage. So my question is, in your view, and taking into account the regional scale and the prospect scale, what would be the most important knowledge gaps that you would like to be filled, and that would be actually crucial for exploration in the case of Palmeirópolis? What needs to be known right now that would be really, you know, the cherry on the top of the cake?
Yeah, look, I think it's partly to do with the deposit style and partly to do with filling in the gaps in the exploration. So from the deposit style, the answer to that question is alteration, metallurgy, and massive sulfide species or sulfide distribution. So the work that was done by the CPRM has been excellent, and it was done to the highest level at the time, but it's 40 years old, and you know, we can go back to the drill core and we can go and relog it, but that's a 40-year-old drill core that's been moved and sampled and reboxed, and there's gaps in that drill core, and all the best pieces of the massive sulfide have been sampled 2 or 3 times. So there's blocks of wood saying that this was done from met, and so there are gaps like that. Not to mention the fact that the sulfides are all tarnished as well. So to get new holes into the actual ore body, we'll start to build our own knowledge around that actual drill core, and we haven't had enough time due to COVID and due to not having the team ready to go to do that. So it'll be a combination of relogging the existing core and then drilling holes to allow us to get that knowledge, understand the actual mineral setting on one side. The second bit will be to try and understand how do we distinguish the drill targets, so the discovery side of things, without going and spending millions of dollars on drilling false targets. So refining our exploration model, using the known deposits as our type, which is a real advantage, and then applying that across the belt. So that's kind of, we'll start with what we've got and what we know at C1 and C3, do some infill drilling, learn a lot, and apply that once we start doing some more exploration style stuff. Okay,
thank you. And the second question, we moved to Canabrava, and during your presentation, you actually compared, so to speak, or put it as an analog, Canabrava and Niquelândia. But in Niquelândia, well, the main ore is lateritic, and I don't know if they have, or if they are after nickel sulfide there, or nickel copper sulfide there. I don't know the resources that they've got up to now. I don't know if these resources are going to become sooner or later reserves. I really don't know. But in your case, in Canabrava, you're going after the sulfide. You're going after the primary mineralization, right?
Yep, 100%. Because partly because my investors are not interested in the laterite theme or the laterite targets, and that's because they can be very expensive to develop. They have sent many companies broke because they are technically very difficult to develop. So, whereas the sulfide prospects are they are much simpler to put into production, and I think they attract a lot more, I guess, investor interest from the general market for those deposits, for that style of mineralisation. So you're probably across. There's been a recent discovery in Australia, a project called Julimar by a company called Chalice, and it's very close to Perth. You know, quite a surprising new district. And I guess that's the style of mineralisation that we're trying to find. There's dozens of companies in Australia looking for similar similar zones, similar rock types, and we think that this has got some similarities to that. So we're applying a little bit of neurology to that exploration process.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Rob. I wish you success in both projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto. Thanks, Adelene.
Oh, thank you. Nós gostaríamos de agradecer aos palestrantes e que os resultados apresentados são bem interessantes em apreço para as comunidades dentro desses novos distritos aí que estão emergindo. Desejamos sucesso a todos os 4 palestrantes da tarde de hoje, aos projetos, e que possamos continuar conhecendo os resultados no próximo Smakman em 2022. Eu gostaria de agradecer à DIMB, nos nomes dos professores Roberto Xavier Pires e do Gustavo Melo, pelo convite para mediar esse painel, junto com o Erastro, e agradeço o Erastro pela parceria na tarde de hoje. E agradeço a participação de todos e todas presentes. Boa tarde.